Welcome, everybody. We're so excited to have you here today, joining us for our Advocacy in Action webinar series. My name is Paige Rivard, and I'm the CEO of PWSA USA. Also mom to Jake, an 11-year-old living with Prader-Willi syndrome. So today's webinar, we're going to be hearing from two great FDA speakers. They're going to be touching on topics such as understanding patient engagement at the FDA, the importance of our community's voice, patient listening sessions, and many more topics. And what I want to do is I would like to introduce Dorothea Lance. Dorothea is our community and engagement specialist. Dorothea is really all things that we do with volunteers and advocacy at PWSA. And this year we're really putting a focus on advocacy. And so Dorothea is going to introduce our great speakers today. So I will turn it over to you, Dorothea, to do some introductions. Dorothea?
Thank you so much, Paige. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Dorothea Lance. I'm the Community Engagement Specialist with PWSA USA. And I am also a mother to Hunter, who will be 5 in July, and he has PWS. So we're really excited to be able to bring this opportunity to our community today. As everyone who is in attendance already knows, FDA engagement and patient involvement is a topic that's become very important to our community. And we've seen that throughout the past couple of years, in the last year especially. So being able to have the opportunity to bring these two amazing individuals to come and speak with our community and tell us a little bit more about how we can actively engage with the FDA to really affect change is just such an amazing opportunity. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Sadhna Khatri and Susan Chitteran. And before we get started, I do want to reiterate that we will not be answering any questions about a specific drug that's being submitted to the FDA. This is not that kind of a conversation. And if you do have any questions, please go ahead and use the Q&A portion. We will have a couple of questions throughout the webinar. But if you have a specific question, we'll go ahead and put it in the Q&A chat, and we'll get to it at the end. When we finish up the presentation, we're going to open it up for a Q&A session. So that'll be the time when we go ahead and answer the questions. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead. I don't know, Susan or Sadhna, I don't know which one of you want to go ahead and start. But let's go ahead and get going. I think it's Susan probably, right?
It is, yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, thank you. Well, thank you so much. I'm really thrilled to have the opportunity to be here virtually and share a little bit more about ways that patient communities and advocates can connect with FDA. So, and I'm thrilled to be here with my colleague Sadhna as well, who will be talking about her efforts within the Center for Drugs. So my name is Susan Chitteran, and I'm with the Office of Patient Affairs at FDA. And I'm a social worker by background, and in my role, I manage the patient listening session program for the agency, which I will be talking about in the next couple of slides. Next slide, please. Okay, and so this is just a quick overview of what I'm going to talk about. So I'll basically just give a little overview of why patient engagement is important to us, and a little bit about my office's work. And then I won't go too deep into what other offices are doing, but I'll just touch on that, and then I'll share some resources. Next slide, please. Next slide, thank you. So, you know, if anybody has attended any FDA presentations, they might have heard this before, but I always think it's really important to emphasize this point here is that FDA is a public health agency. We're under the Department of Health and Human Services, and our goal is to ensure that public health is protected. And one of the ways that we do that is by ensuring that we're listening to patients when it comes to medical product development. And people often are surprised to hear that FDA wants to hear from patients, but we do, because in our work, especially in the scientific side, as products are being reviewed, you know, we talk to a lot of different kinds of stakeholder groups, so researchers, folks in academia, certainly on the industry side, medical product developers. So it would make sense that we would also want to be able to talk to patients and patient communities as well, because ultimately it's patients and their families that are going to be using these products, right? And so patients, because you have the lived experience, or as a parent, you see your child having experience, you know best what it's like to live with and manage the disease from start to finish, right? From the morning all the way to the night. And so because of that, you have very unique insights and perspectives on things that only you can answer, right? It's very different to read about something in the literature, but it's very different to actually experience that firsthand. So you provide us that input that's really important as we do our work, especially on the review side. Next slide, please. So I won't go through all the details here because there's a lot of information, but this is just to show that the agency has had a history of formally working with patient communities for a number of decades. We like to say it formally started in the 80s with the HIV/AIDS epidemic that really gave rise to patient communities coming to the FDA and saying that, you know, we have perspectives that need to be heard. And so since then, we've stood up a number of different offices and programs throughout the years. You'll see, especially since 2012, there's been an explosion of different types of opportunities. We'll talk about some of them here, but notably, one of the things that came out of this is my office, which was created in late 2017, which I'll talk about in the next slide. Next slide, please. Yep. So this is a very brief overview of our office. So we're a small office within the office of the commissioner. There's 6 of us. And so the idea behind our office is to really be the front door at the agency for folks that want to be able to connect with the agency and, you know, really don't know where to begin. Sitting in the commissioner's office, we have the advantage of being able to work with all of our medical product centers. I'll actually talk about that in a second, but the way we do our work is in 3 different buckets. So really, we focus on cross-cutting programs and activities. We work on public-private partnerships, and then we focus on trying to enhance communication to patients. Next slide, please. And so this kind of gives you a little bit of an overview of how our office works with the different medical product centers. So my office, Office of Patient Affairs, is in this gray triangle here that says Office of the Commissioner. And you'll see the other remaining triangles in blue represent the 3 different medical product centers. So there's a center for biologics, center for drugs, and one for devices. And within each of the centers, they have staff that focus on issues specific to that type of center. But my office works to kind of connect all of the centers. So there are issues or meetings, for example, that might touch on the work of multiple centers. So for example, the Center for Drugs and Devices might have a need to be in the same meeting together versus just having separate meetings. So if that's the case, then my office gets involved. So we try to make sure that all the offices are coordinated and communicating, especially when it comes to patient groups. That way, when you're coming to talk to us, you can really talk to multiple centers at one time, as opposed to one center. So an example of that might be if we were working with a patient organization that focused on diabetes, that group might want to talk to somebody from the device space to talk about things like glucose monitoring, but they also might want to talk to somebody in the drug space to talk about the kind of medications that they use. So it's an example like that where our office might come in and try to coordinate a meeting so that everybody's at the table. Next slide. Oops. So I think while the slides are coming up, just going to talk a little bit about my office specifically. So we really do work in 4 major kind of areas. You can, yeah, let's maybe advance to the next slide, but in, what we do is our work, we focus on 4 major areas, right? So we do the patient listening session program, which I manage. We work on the PEC, which is the Patient Engagement the Patient Engagement Collaborative. We focus on communications, and then we work on the EMA cluster. So we work with the European Medicines Agency. I'll talk about that in a little bit. You can advance to the next slide, actually the next 2 slides. And then one more. Yep. So I'll start with the patient listenings. You can go back one. So I'll start with patient listening sessions. So I'm partial to this one because it's the program that I manage. So I'll start here with kind of this last bullet here. So again, this kind of emphasizes what I was just talking about, how this is an activity that involves multiple medical product centers. So like CDER, for example, or CBER as another example. And so this is a type of meeting that you can have, a patient organization can have with the agency. And the goal here is to be able to talk about your disease experience or any health related experience that you're having. And you're basically talking directly to FDA scientific staff. And so this gives you an opportunity to share your voice directly with FDA. And then these are generally pretty small meetings. We don't really, these are not public meetings at all. It's really just the folks on the FDA side that are working on, whatever that specific disease area is. And this is really a way for FDA staff to be able to be educated about a disease or condition. So think about it from that perspective. Next slide, we'll talk a little bit about just some of the basics behind the program. So we run this program in collaboration with 2 external partners. One is NORD, who you may be familiar with, and the other is Reagan-Udall Foundation for the FDA. And so since we started the program in late 2018, we've done 55 different listening sessions since then. We had our last one just yesterday, in fact, and then there's 2 types of listening sessions. So the first type is when my colleagues at the FDA have very specific questions that they want to learn about from a specific patient community or a subset of a patient community. So in that case, they might reach out to me and request a session. And then in that, we would pretty much make sure that the patient voice is brought to the FDA so they could ask those questions. The other type is when a patient organization requests a meeting with the FDA because there are perspectives that you want to be able to share with us. And so in that case, you would work with our office to help plan that sort of meeting. And then I mentioned earlier that these meetings are not public. We also don't record these meetings at all. We don't transcribe them or anything like that. But there are summaries available from listening sessions, and you can actually find those on our listening session page. And I put the link here at the bottom. Patient listening sessions is the listening session page. The fastest way to probably find it, if you forget that website, is just Google FDA patient listening session, and it should be able to come up. Next slide. So in the next slide, this is essentially kind of a snapshot about what these sessions actually look like. So I think I mentioned already that they are not public. And I also mentioned that these are really meetings that are pretty much the patient community and FDA. So they're not open to other stakeholder groups like industry, drug developers, folks like that. This is really an opportunity for you as patients. Meetings can be anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half. Most people try to do a meeting that's about an hour and a half just because it gives us more time to learn from you. And prior to COVID, we were doing some of these in person, but right now we are doing them on Zoom. So just like this. And then our office will work with you to coordinate these meetings. And so these are really opportunities to, again, talk about the disease, how your treatment preferences, any burdens that you experience, just how the disease is impacting your life or the life of your loved ones. But these are not ways to come to the FDA, or it's an avenue to come to the FDA and endorse particular products. We are actually not allowed to talk about any products that are in development at all at the agency. Just that is something that only really the pharmaceutical company can do, or we'd have to essentially have those people at the table if and have their permission to talk about those things. So in these meetings, it's really just disease experience. So that's the general idea behind that. So in the next slide, I'm just going to talk briefly about one of the other types of things that we do in our office. It's called a patient engagement cluster in the next slide. And so that is really an opportunity where FDA works with our European counterparts, European Medicines Agency, to really talk about lessons learned. So people often ask us, well, does FDA talk to your counterparts in Europe about what is going on? And we do. We actually share information about patient type work we're doing. So recently, I was able to share a little bit about the patient listening session program, since they don't have that formal program there yet. But so the idea is that we can learn from each other to advance our work. And then in the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Patient Engagement Collaborative. So this is something that we run in partnership with CDER, which is the Clinical Trials Transformation Initiative. And the idea here is that this is a group of individual patients or caregivers or folks that represent patient advocacy groups. They serve on terms, so they're 2 to 3 year terms, and they're staggered. So we recently had, I think it was about 8 folks that just kind of joined the collaborative, and some that kind of dropped off because their terms were over. And the idea is that they help give us ideas about how to better engage with patients and patient communities, so what we can do better. And then in the next slide, it talks a little bit about ways that we're working to improve our communications with patients. So one is through the video series. We have an educational video series. We'll be releasing one soon on the patient listening session program. We also are trying to improve our website to make it a little bit more patient friendly. I know it's a little difficult to navigate through some of the content on there. And the PEC is actually helping us do that. So they're helping us make it a little bit more patient friendly. And we also have a social media page on Twitter as well. And so you can skip over to the next 2 slides actually. So just briefly, I'm just going to mention some of the work that we do outside the office, my office, but other things that are going on in the agency. So one is the patient representative program. So this is something that's run out of a different office within the Office of the Commissioner. But the idea here is that anytime there's an advisory committee meeting at the agency includes a patient perspective in those meetings. So to do so, we pull patients or caregivers from the patient representative program. And so the program, folks in the program actually represent over 300 different diseases and conditions, and they have to go through a pretty strict conflict of interest screening. And so we're always looking for people to be part of that program. Again, advisory committee meetings don't come up that often. So there, you might be in that program for a while before you get called to do an assignment. But if that's something you're interested in, we can help connect you with the program director over there. And then in the next slide, I'm not going to go through all these different programs here, but basically this is just to show you that my colleagues in the different centers have a lot of different activities that they do specific to work in their centers. And so Sadhna will really talk a little bit about the ones in the first column here in CDER, but I also just want to point out that my colleagues in CBER and CDRH also have meetings as well. And then I know I talked about listening sessions a little earlier, but I also want to highlight that different centers have their own version of listening sessions. So for example, if there is a patient meeting that CBER is holding, they might call that a listening session. So it can kind of get a little confusing, but just wanted you to be aware of that. And then in the next slide, I'm just going to really talk about, actually, and you can advance to the next slide. These are just a couple of resources I just want to briefly show you. The first one is there's a page here on acronyms, because we tend to use a lot of acronyms at the agency and it can get a little confusing. I understand that you're going to be able to have access to these slides afterwards. So hopefully you can use this as a resource. If you ever hear anybody at FDA talking in acronyms, we try not to, but hopefully you can use this as a reference point. And then in the next slide, it talks a little bit about how to request meetings and submit questions. So I understand that your community's already met with the agency before, but if you forgot how to request a meeting, this is how you would go about it. This is managed out of our office. So you would essentially just click the buttons that are relevant to you. So are you a patient? Are you a health professional? do you have a question or a meeting, and you enter your question if you have a question. If it's a meeting, you will be asked to submit an agenda. And so this will help just make sure that your request goes to the appropriate office to handle based on whatever topics that you want to talk about. And then in my final slide here, this is just saying that our office also manages a website, a resource on any COVID-19 updates. So you can go to our website and check that out. It just gives you a list of all the links and updates that FDA comes out with related to COVID-19 that might be of interest to you. And so I have a couple of polling questions in the next slide here. So maybe we could just go through those next. So this polling question, hopefully these are not too hard, but which of the following statements is false in regard to the listening session program? A, listening sessions are not recorded. Listening sessions involve staff from 2 or more medical product centers. Meeting summaries from listening sessions are available to the public. And D, listening sessions are a good way to tell the FDA why they should approve an investigational medical product. So which of those is false? Hopefully, you know, in your head, I'll give you the right answer. It's D. So these are, again, not ways to advocate for approval of a drug. They're really to share disease experience. And then in the next slide, this is related. This is another kind of quick question. So this is related to when it might be appropriate to submit meeting requests. So there's a lot of different options here. I won't read all of them, but you know, what are the appropriate reasons why a community might want to talk to the FDA? You know, is it cost or price of drugs? Is it the quality of care? Is it about sharing disease experience, adverse events, talking about investigational products, you know, or is it talking about unmet needs? So the answer here, you know, in case folks are stumped, and I'll explain this a little bit, is, you know, some of the answers are not correct because they're not relevant to FDA's work. Okay, so if you selected option number H, that is the correct one, because you really want to, the reason why A is not appropriate is because the FDA doesn't focus on cost. B is not appropriate because we don't have any authority over the type of care that you receive from a doctor. So that one is not correct. And then E is not correct because we are not allowed to talk about any investigational products without the sponsor being there. So the other ones are correct. And so in the next slide, it's just, I think, my contact information and our office's contact information. So if you have any questions, we encourage you to reach out to me. So thank you so much. And I guess, Sadhna, I guess you are the next speaker.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Paige and Dorothea, for the introductions, and welcome to each and every one of you. I'm so excited to be here today. I'm Sadhna Khatri. I'm a commander in the United States Public Health Service, and I work at FDA in the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. I'm an associate director, and I lead the Center for Drug Evaluation Research's engagement programs. And again, I'm so excited to be talking to you today and looking forward to further engagements with your community. So to start with the presentation, I have a few questions just to change the momentum in our presentation here. Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, which is in short called CDER, makes sure that safe and effective fill in the blank are available to improve the health of consumers. So we have 4 choices: vaccines, foods, drugs, and cosmetics. And at the end of the presentation, there are polling questions. We will give the answers to all these questions, which we are putting out now. So next slide, please. What initiative did the FDA launch in 2013 to gain patient perspectives on specific diseases and their treatments through a series of patient meetings to better inform the drug review process. The choices are Clear Path Initiative, the Patient-Focused Drug Development, Clinical Trials Initiative, No Trial Left Behind. So something to think about, and let's proceed to the next slide, please. So CDER, which is the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, its mission is to promote and protect the public health by ensuring that safe and effective drugs are available to Americans. This is very succinct mission, but it encompasses a lot of activities. CDER routinely consults with the American people in making its decisions about the drugs that they use. It holds public meetings to incorporate expert and consumer input into its decisions. The center also announces many of its decisions in advance so that members of the public, academia, industry, trade associations, consumer groups, and professional societies can comment and make suggestions before decisions become final. In addition, CDER holds public meetings with consumer and patient groups, professional societies, and pharmaceutical trade associations to obtain enhanced public input into its planning and priority setting practices. Over the years, policies have changed and laws have gotten stronger, but the center's present and future mission remains constant, and that is to ensure that the benefits of the drug products made available to the public outweigh all known risks. Ultimately, patients are the focus of all CDER activities, and we need to engage with them. Next slide, please. So first, let's start with where are the opportunities for engagement? This has changed over the last decade since I have been involved in drug development. Patient input is playing an important and increasing role in the development and regulation of medical products. Patient-focused drug development, in short, we call them PFDD meetings, are turning out to be perhaps the most effective and the best way to bring to us patients' understanding and experience of the disease. So I will be talking more about them in later slides. Listening sessions, which my colleague Susan also alluded to. So listening sessions are also happening in CDER. And sometimes patient advocacy organizations, they request to speak with us and will actually come in and we will talk to them and engage with them and listen to their point of view. So typically scheduled with the review divisions. There are a large number of other patient engagement activities that are in progress at CDER. Some of these are common to all FDA centers. And we have advisory committee meetings, and most of these advisory committees do have a patient representative assigned to the advisory committee to present that point of view. So patient representatives are selected to participate in an AC meeting. So again, this is an opportunity for public dialogue. Patient representatives are considered government employees for the duration of the time they're serving on the advisory committee. We also have public speaking sessions where many patients often take advantage and come and speak, but they often get about 5 minutes to take their point of view, and to that advisory committee, that's 5 minutes each. We often encounter patient advocacy organizations at external meetings. For example, we meet patient groups at NORD, which is the National Organization of Rare Diseases. And there we often have very lively engagement conversations with the patients and their patient community. Then there are citizens petitions. So many advocacy organizations have the sophistication to submit to us a citizens petition, which outlines a desired action that they would like us to consider or a point of view for us to consider. So we carefully review those. They often have a lot of legalistic aspects to them. Then finally, we do put out notices in the Federal Register so that the public can be aware of some of the things we are doing, such as guidances. We do carefully review all the comments, sometimes thousands of comments that come to us from those Federal Register notices, often from patients and patient advocacy organizations. We often receive a lot of emails and letters, and sometimes certain advocacy organizations seem to think that the most effective way is to bombard us with thousands of emails. And while certainly it does get our attention, I can tell you it's probably not the most effective way to be able to get your point across to us. So patient opinions are also expressed publicly, including through the social media, for example, the FDA Facebook page. And as I already said, that majority of these patient activities are common throughout different FDA centers. Next slide, please. So patient-focused drug development is a systematic approach to help ensure that patient experiences, perspectives, needs, and priorities are captured and meaningfully incorporated into drug development and evaluation. Now, keeping the definition of PFDD in mind, I would like to talk about the FDA's patient-focused drug development initiative. FDA recognized a need for more systematic ways of gathering patient perspective on their condition and treatment options. Patients with chronic diseases are really experts in that disease. They tell the FDA which factors matter when they choose a course of treatment, and that might be different than what doctor thinks. Under the PDUFA 5 patient-focused drug development initiative, FDA committed to conducting a series of meetings focused on specific diseases. In the meetings, we hear the patient's perspective of the impact of their condition on their daily life, on the treatments, and how to choose a treatment. These meetings are a critical aspect of FDA's decision-making and give us the context in which a regulatory decision is made. So CDER has held so many patient-focused drug development meetings. After each meeting, a document called Voice of Patient is developed. This summary report captures the patient input. This report allows federal agencies, academic researchers, drug developers, patient stakeholders, consortia, and patients to use this information. So next slide, please. Here is a graphic which shows the topics of different meetings that FDA conducted under PDUFA by developing a more systematic way of gathering patient perspectives on their condition and available treatments. So next slide, please. There was also growing external interest in expanding efforts to gather patient input in support of drug development and evaluation. So in 2015, FDA started welcoming patient organizations to identify and organize their own patient-focused collaborations. These externally led patient-focused drug development meetings provide an opportunity to hear directly from patients, and it is also encouraging to patient population that advocacy groups are collaborating with the agency. Patients are able to express what matters most to them and take charge of their health. Patient organization identify and organize patient-focused collaborations to generate public input on specific disease areas. PFDD meetings provide an important opportunity to hear directly from the patients, patient advocates, and caregivers about the symptoms that matter most to them, the impact of the disease has on patients' daily lives, and patients' experiences with currently available treatments. The patient input from meetings can support FDA staff as they conduct benefit risk assessments for products under review or advise drug sponsors on their development programs. We also believe that patients' input collected from these meetings can have value to drug development more broadly. For example, by helping to identify areas of unmet need, such as aspects of patient's condition that is not currently being addressed in current therapies. The input may also help developers as they identify or create tools used to measure the benefits of potential therapies. The deliverables, a summary report from an externally led patient-focused drug development meeting, can be shared on FDA website. While FDA is open to participating in a well-designed and well-conducted meeting, an externally led patient-focused drug development meeting and the resulting products, surveys or reports will not be considered FDA-sponsored or FDA-endorsed. Patients' perspectives are just critically important to the FDA, and they are so meaningful in determining how drugs should be developed. Incorporating the voice of patient is a very high priority for CDER. So under PDUFA 6 and the 21st Century Cures Act, which is 2018 to 2022, FDA is working on developing a series of patient-focused drug development methodological guidances and other related policy guidances. This will help the patient communities, researchers, and drug developers on programmatic and methodological sound strategies. So I cannot stress enough how important having the patient and the patient's voice at the table is during drug development and in evaluating the safety and effectiveness of new medicines. Next slide, please. So now I can talk about the office where I work and its role in patient engagement. So I am in the Office of Center Director, and my office's name is Professional Affairs and Stakeholder Engagement. And we lead engagement activities with non-regulated stakeholders across the center, which is the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, facilitating dialogue and collaboration between patients, their advocates, healthcare providers, professional associations, and the CDER staff. So the mission of our office is to enrich the experience of patient advocacy groups, healthcare professionals, and agencies in engaging with CDER. Improve our stakeholders' drug regulatory insight and understanding. And if you're familiar with stakeholder groups, they are very wide-ranging stakeholder groups which we engage with. So PACE is really in the middle and poised to be in the middle between the CDER leadership and our stakeholders. So we act as conduits into the center for stakeholders, concerns, viewpoints, ideas, meeting requests, and many more. We also are responsible for enhancing stakeholders, which we refer to as non-sponsors, awareness of the center's current thinking. We also promote collaborative actions regarding issues of mutual concern. May I please request the next slide? So within PACE, we fulfill many functions related to stakeholder engagement. I will talk about listening sessions in my next slide. So you can see all the different functions surrounding in this slide, what we are doing. So starting with targeted outreach and stakeholder calls. We use these programs to keep our stakeholders informed about the agency's current thinking and decisions. Through targeted outreach, we electronically push out agencies' information out quickly to a range of stakeholder groups, and they amplify the message to their memberships. At PACE, we also coordinate and moderate stakeholder calls, which are held between the CDER subject matter experts and stakeholder groups when the FDA has an important message to convey to a particular audience that align with CDER actions. Then we also have CDER Network of Experts program. This program helps us provide CDER staff with rapid access to external scientific, clinical, and medical expertise to supplement internal existing knowledge and expertise within the center. So this program was particularly very helpful in gaining useful information during COVID-19, where we had the pandemic had started, and FDA really wanted to understand from the experts who were working in the front lines, who were the pulmonologists, the critical care specialists, and interventional physicians who were on the front line treating the COVID-19 patients. The agency wanted to understand what was their understanding, what treatments were working, what was the need at that time there. So this was really helpful, reaching out to the experts outside of the agency, gathering that information, bringing that back to the agency experts and helping them review the drugs, also bringing in that important information to fulfill the gap in the treatments, whatever we needed to do, take the next steps. And then we also have the Safe Use Initiative. So this is a research program focused on reducing preventable harm by developing, implementing, and evaluating cross-sector interventions with partners committed to safe and appropriate medication use. We also have the American Medical Association Medical Student Program. So not only we are trying to understand what is happening in our landscape, but we are also trying to increase awareness in the future physicians about the role of FDA and its public health mission. So we are trying to increase their awareness in the next generation of the physicians who will be on board treating patients and taking that message out to their patient communities. While they understand the role of FDA better, they're going to be able to translate it better and communicate it better to their patient communities where they are practicing. So core of our work is engagement with stakeholders and strengthen dialogue with the general public and patients in particular. So patients are at the heart of PACE's work at CDER. Next slide, please. So listening sessions, they are built on the provision in both the 21st Century's Cures Act of 2016 and the Food and Drug Administration Reauthorization Act of 2017. So CDER's participation in listening sessions demonstrate our commitment to expanding stakeholder engagement as a consideration during our regulatory efforts. So patient voice is important to us because patients, they bring insight to a disease. So patients provide insight on issues, problems, and/or questions that are important to patients and family members. So we also recognize not just one patient represents the whole patient community of particular disease. Patients have a vested interest and diversity of opinions, varied perspectives, both in terms of risk tolerance and potential benefit. So it's important to identify what matters and what is important to patients. We highly value patient engagement and its contribution to the development of drug products. So a patient input can direct drug development in many ways. It can help with the understanding of the disease and their impact, and it helps identification of specific symptoms that are significant to patients. So we want to hear from you. It might also support drug development more broadly, identify areas of unmet need in the patient population, identify on or develop tools that assess benefit of potential therapies. It also raises awareness and channel engagement within the patient community. So on this slide, we have listed few of the sessions. This is not an inclusive list with the patient community with whom we have met and orchestrated the patient listening sessions. And as my colleague Susan illustrated too, that in her office, which is the patient affairs staff in the commissioner's office, if a meeting request regarding drug goes to their office, that is again channeled back to us. So there are two I would say portals. You can either go through their portal or you can Google it. As she mentioned earlier, it's a little bit harder to maneuver through the FDA website. If you can Google and put in request a meeting on drugs, you will see our portal, and our portal is similar to the portal of the Office of Commissioner, and you can request by putting an agenda and what you want to discuss, and fill a very simplified form and request a meeting with us through that portal. So next slide, please. So it illustrates, the illustrated on the slide are some of the efforts that we plan to increase our stakeholder awareness of how to engage with CDER. We have done multiple number of public workshops. We have also done Twitter chats. We have done numerous drop-in articles and things like that to increase public's awareness. And like we are presenting today at this platform, we present at different platforms at NORD, at Food Drug Law Institute, and other advocacy group platforms to increase patients' awareness about about how you can engage with FDA. So next slide, please. So you can see on the slide PACE supports CDER's COVID-19 response efforts by facilitating communication and strategic engagement with external stakeholder groups. And on the slide, you can see the wide range of stakeholders. So I wanted to identify only some of the patient advocacy groups and health professional organizations. Again, this is not an all-inclusive list, but it does represent few of the patient advocacy groups, the professional organizations, and others with whom we have engaged most recently. Next slide, please. Now we are back again to the questions. So again, I'll read the questions. The Center for Drug Evaluation and Research makes sure that safe and effective, fill in the blank, are available to improve the health of consumers. So, the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, which is also called CDER, performs an essential public health task by making sure that safe and effective drugs are available to improve the health of people in the United States. As part of the US Food and Drug Administration, CDER regulates over-the-counter and prescription drugs, including biological therapies and generic drugs. So this work covers more than just medicines. For example, fluoride toothpaste, antiperspirants, dandruff shampoos, and sunscreens are all considered drugs. So the correct answer is C, which is drugs. And now we can move on to the next question. What initiative did the FDA launch in 2013 to gain patient perspectives on specific diseases and their treatments through a series of patient meetings to better inform the drug review process? And I think I had a couple of slides on that. And the correct answer here is B, which is the patient-focused drug development. And we can move on to the next slide. And here I have listed a few of the some of the resources which could be helpful to you, along with the email addresses where you can reach them if you have any questions or you want to request a meeting. And next slide, please. And if you have any specific questions related to CDER or any meeting requests for CDER, you can always email me, or I've also listed the general mailbox email address, which is cederpace@fda.hhs.gov. And this concludes my presentation, and thank you so much. And over to the moderator, please.
Thank you so much. Paige, do you want to say a few things?
Yes, I just wanted to thank both of you very much for your time today. Very informative, very exciting. And we have a couple of questions, and I'll just throw out the first one, and then we can kind of go from there. One of the questions is, what steps would someone need to take, or could they take, if they want to be involved in an FDA committee or program?
Sadhna, do you want me to start?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Okay, well, I think on a very basic level, I would encourage them to reach out to my office, Patient Affairs, and we can help get them to the right program or the right place, whether that is the patient representative program or whether that's figuring out another way to get involved at the agency, whether it's through one of our meetings. But I think just in general, other things, and I think this gets at one of the questions I see in the chat here about being an advocate for your child, is that just keep also in mind that the agency is just part of that process, right, in terms of the treatment aspect. And so working with advocacy groups, as people already are doing, is a great way, because there is strength in numbers, and sometimes being able to collect a lot of different voices that say similar things or the same things gives a lot of weight to what your words are. The other thing is participating in clinical trials is a good way to be an advocate and get involved, if not for yourself, but for others in the community. And then also thinking about what your relationship is with folks on the medical product development side. So the people that are the companies that are developing products, is that they're developing these products for the community, right? So you need to make sure that what they are studying and what they're doing works for you, right? There's no point in somebody developing a product that ultimately is not going to be helpful for you. So it's also being present, kind of knocking at their door and saying, we want to be in conversations with you about what works best for our community.
Great, thank you. So you answered one of the questions there in the chat, so thank you. And I guess I would also add to that question that the person asked, how should I focus my efforts? Again, I think, Susan, you mentioned participate in clinical trials. I mean, if you are able to, our community is fairly small, but clinical trials are very important. And so whenever you can, participate. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to us. We also, PWSA, as I mentioned, when we started, we have a big focus on advocacy. So in September, we will be hosting a trip to DC to do advocacy work in DC. So be on the lookout for that. That's Dorothea will be heading a lot of that up, but there'll be more information on that. That will be a first time that I'm aware of in a long time that PWSA has really formalized a trip to DC. So that's exciting. So hopefully people can join us and participate that way as well.
So there is another question, if I may, that I'd like to go ahead and ask. So we've talked a lot about patient listening sessions, and I know that everybody who is involved or on this webinar today knows that we were involved in a patient listening session, as you demonstrated in your PowerPoint last spring. So, we were involved in a patient listening session as a result of something else that was going on. Is there an opportunity for us as an organization or PWS as a community to engage in another patient listening session? We have a tremendous amount of unmet needs in our community, and I could sit here and probably talk for another hour about what those needs might be, but I won't. Is it possible for us to organize a patient listening session to express those needs at any given point in time?
Lana, do you want me to start?
Yeah, because you guys have the criteria. Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. So the quick answer to that is yes, you can request another meeting or another type of listening session. I understand before yours was specific to CDER for the Center for Drugs, but yeah, people do have multiple types of meetings with the agency. But I think the thing to keep in mind is when you're working on your request for a meeting, keep in mind that the agency receives thousands of requests for meetings. So what you want to be able to do is be very clear in your request, right? That we ask you to identify your goals for meeting with the agency, what topics you want to cover, as well as submitting a draft agenda of that meeting. And so that helps us be able to determine what offices need to be present, right? So the other thing it helps us determine is if these are topics that you've already talked about, one of the questions that we will come back to you and ask is what's different about the meeting that you had prior and now, right? So we'll want to see some difference in obviously it might not be the topic, right? But there might be some aspects of the meeting that might make it different. So for an example, we've had organizations that have requested, for example, a patient-focused drug development meeting a couple of years ago. And in that amount of time since then, new things have come to light or new discoveries or new questions the community has. And so they've turned around and requested a listening session, which we've been able to grant.
Thank you so much. I have another question actually. Is there, do organizations or pharmaceutical companies or outside entities ever engage with the FDA to see what organizations have had patient listening sessions? If there has been any interest in things, can you maybe talk a little bit about that?
Sure, and we might have different answers, Sadhna, on this, but from the patient listening session perspective, absolutely. When we were standing up the program in 2018, we actually worked with the pharmaceutical companies because we wanted to hear, we knew that they were interested in these meetings and they'd want to know what was going on. And so one of the things that came out of that discussion was the idea about the meeting summaries, which I mentioned. And those summaries are publicly available. So oftentimes what happens is on the development side, they will reach out to us. They reach out to our office directly and said, hey, we've heard there's a listening session on this disease. Is there going to be a summary available? Or where is the summary? And we point them to the website where it is. So yes, we absolutely have had folks ask about that. I've done presentations in the past where people in the audience are from the development side, and they will say that they've referenced those. From our perspective, if there was a listening session a couple of years ago, or maybe there's people that are new on staff and weren't aware of that or didn't attend, they will reach out to us internally and ask for the summary if they didn't have it already. So that's sort of my response from my end. And Sadhna, you might have something else to share.
Yeah, so the meeting summaries for CDER, we do not post those publicly. And these sessions are by design very small listening sessions between the patient advocacy groups and the responsible review divisions. So we do not share the meeting minutes or the discussions at the meeting outside of those who are present in the meeting, but it is up to the advocacy group people if they want to. So if they prepare a summary, so it's up to them that if they would like to share it with any pharmaceutical company or other advocacy groups or maybe post it. So it's up to them, but with us, we do not do that.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
There is another question in the chat. I think we may have already answered this in a different way. The question is, if sending thousands of letters is not an effective way to be heard, what is? So I know patient listening sessions is something we've talked a lot about. Is there an additional way that a community such as ours might be able to have their voice heard?
Yeah, I guess I would take a step back from that question and just say, I think it ultimately depends on what your message is. Like, what is it that you're hoping to accomplish, right? And I think based on what that is, the response would be different, right? So for example, if you wanted to have a listening session, or if there are perspectives to share about a disease and you feel like you're not heard, the answer to that could be requesting a listening session. If you want to have a public meeting that brings a lot of stakeholders to the table, not just FDA, so the industry side, it might be a patient-focused drug development meeting, right? So it ultimately depends on what your message is. If your issue is that there are no treatments out there, right? We certainly hear that from our side as folks who review, but ultimately that message might be more effective going towards folks that are developing treatments, whereas the agency doesn't develop treatments. So I think it really goes back to what your main concern is in writing or reaching out.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that, that of course, the message is important. What is the message? And also if the message is directed to the right place within FDA, then it will certainly draw attention because, as I said, patients are at the heart of FDA's work. So, and just my comment during the presentation of writing many emails, that certainly gets our attention, but that's not the right way. And I guess certain advocacy groups, when we do respond to those letters, but then I think more is gained when you're coming in for a listening session. The review divisions are able to hear from you, and then they have their own discussions, and they ask follow-up questions during the listening session to have a better understanding of the unmet need for what the patients are trying to describe, hear from their experiences. And I think we have together been in the listening sessions, and they have been very effective in getting the message across.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you both. I know we're out of time, but thank you again. And I just wanted to say, we've interacted with the FDA specifically over the last year and a half quite a bit. And so we appreciate everything you do on a daily basis for our community and other rare disease communities. We truly appreciate your time and efforts, and hope that there are more opportunities coming up that we can have more interactions with you, and ultimately lead to what we all are hoping, that there are some more treatments for Prader-Willi syndrome.
Yes.
So
Great.
thank you. Thank you all very
you
much.
both.